Another week of the country in lockdown does of course call for another Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama review. In today's review I'm going to be taking a look at one of the most recent releases from the Big Finish Time War series. This time round I'm taking a look at Susan's War, featuring the one and only Carol Ann Ford, who did of course play the Doctor's granddaughter Susan from the first Doctor era. Now this is of course a brand new Doctor Who Big Finish box set release that is currently available to order from the Big Finish website. The physical box set is £24.99 and you can also purchase the download for this box set for £19.99. If you like what I say throughout this review, there is also a trailer that can be watched on the Big Finish website, as well as some of the story details that you will want for this release. I do believe it will be going up in price to around £35 to £40 in a few months' time, and do also be warned Big Finish are currently operating on a delivery download only basis, and once the lockdown is over they will be shipping out your usual physical CDs once of course non-essential workers can return back to work. This box set is one that a lot of people have been anticipating, and I must admit I was a little bit sceptical to start with, because Susan is not necessarily one of the companions that sticks out to me when it comes to the classic series overall, and I think that this box set is certainly appealing to a certain type of Doctor Who fan. However, I do really love box sets like this, because normally when you have a box set that is of 4 adventures, all of which kind of go off and do their own thing, and more importantly aren't really connected to the broader scope of another series, it makes for a really good opportunity for those people who haven't listened to Big Finish before to be able to jump onto the audio drama bandwagon. Some previous box sets that I've really enjoyed within that singular format do of course include Rose Tyler Dimension Canon, a number of the Unit the New Series box sets, because although that is a part of a broader series, for the most part quite a lot of the box sets are very self-contained and you can listen to any of them in any order without really needing to worry about any of the other previous box sets. And also of course the War Master Only the Good, one of my personal favourite box sets of all time from Big Finish, and this box set offers a very similar opportunity. It is an insight into the Time War series, however without needing to have the prior knowledge of say the 8th Doctor Time War series or the Gallifrey series, which do of course require quite a lot of back listening in order to get full understanding. I also imagine that this box set will be generating a lot of listeners from the people who listened to the 8th Doctor and Lucy Miller series, because of course Susan did also appear within that as well. And just to note, I haven't listened to those stories, so I'm kind of going into this series without knowing the events of the 8th Doctor and Lucy Miller series. However, judging by what happened within this box set, I can kind of infer what happened without needing to actually listen to the actual stories themselves, although hopefully I will get around to those episodes at some point. I do currently have Lucy Miller series 1 and 2, and hopefully one day I'll be able to add series 3 and 4 to that as well. So without further ado, let's take a look at the first episode of the box set, being the Sphere of Influence. This box set starts off in the way that only makes sense. We have that tie between classic series Doctor Who within the Time War and of course the 1960s era of the show. Two very different eras of the show colliding, because regardless of what Twitter says at the minute, of course people believe that new series Doctor Who is a completely different show to classic series Doctor Who, and of course that is an absolute load of rubbish. We are all in one big Doctor Who universe. I think that it is still important to define between the different chapters and eras within the show itself, because throughout time the show has changed to suit different ideas within society, and some of the things that they would have done within the 1960s era of the show of course would look completely out of place in Doctor Who today, which only makes sense for a TV show that has lasted this long. And of course the Sphere of Influence by Eddie Robson is the episode that does the job of tying down those two different eras and reintroducing Susan and Ian Chesterton into the Time War. And I think that it is one of those stories that is perfect for 1960s Doctor Who fans, because we have the harkbacks to that era. We see Ian and Susan return back to the Sense Sphere to meet the Sensorites, which is incredibly exciting. It is nice to see the Sensorites returning to Doctor Who, and it is also nice to see a few references to the Ood in there as well, who are of course related to the Sensorites. How of course they don't appear within the actual story itself, and part of me does think it would have been nice to actually see them included in some way. I think that William Russell is is brilliant as Ian Chesterton. I think that he is a really warm character, and he can offer something to the story that is very different to all of the other episodes. I love the idea of him returning back to the adventures of Doctor Who for so many years after he previously did that within the First Doctor era, because Susan has changed, he has changed, and this episode offers a great opportunity to reflect on that, especially within the early half. We have some of the references to the previous 8th Doctor and Susan adventures, referring to the fact that she has a child, and then of course her being called up to go back to Gallifrey, and it is a nice way to catch up for those people that haven't listened to those stories, and it makes for a very good jumping on point as well. I definitely love their relationship, and I like the fact that although it has changed and both of the characters have gone off to do different things, they are still very much the same people. I think that offers a really nice twist on this story that is rather well written by Eddie Robson, although something that I do bear in mind for this episode is it can be quite slow in parts. I think that the sense sphere and the Sensorites worked very well within the TV show. I think that quite a lot of the costumes did look quite questionable within the original story, although some of them did look okay, and I love this whole idea of this species that can use mind technology, and the Time Lords thinking that they can use that in the war effort in order to beat the Daleks within the Time War. All of that does make absolute sense. However, of course, the Sensorites are a species that don't like loud sounds, they don't like things that are violent, and that makes for a very interesting twist, considering that this is a part of the Time War series that is all about things exploding, things being loud, and of course that does lead to some rather funny scenes within the early half of this story. Although do be warned, I do think that if you are a fan of new series Doctor Who, although slightly more faster paced Doctor Who stories, I think that this one can be considered a little bit of a slow burner, although it does have a nice warm heart to it. I love earlier scenes of Ian being in his house and receiving his call up, and then the very end of this story as well, delivering him back at home just before Barbara comes back from the shopping. It has a heart to it, and as I say, if you like 1960s Doctor Who, it's got the original cast in, and it is a perfect opportunity to catch up with those familiar faces from the 1960s era of the shows. The one other thing that I would have liked to see from this story that I kind of felt was a bit missing was more Gallifrey, because I kind of feel like for the first story of the box set you really need to sell the whole idea of what it is all about, and I did get that to start with. I think there was a few nice hints to what Susan's purpose was within the Time War, and her role being very much of almost a peace settler in a way, going to different parties and trying to figure out what is going on and get their alliance in the involvement within the Time War itself. And it would have been nice to maybe have the inclusion of Gallifrey a bit more prominently within that earlier half, just to kind of spell out what the main aim of the series was, because I'm aware that there was a short trip with the 8th Doctor involving the 8th Doctor taking away Susan's call-up papers or something like that, and it may have been nice to see further reference to that within this story, but I do think that maybe looking back, that short trip could have possibly been incorporated into this box set and make up the early half of this episode, and then involve the Sensorites within the second half, and then overall it would have made a much more quicker paced story compared to the one that we got. But I still found it enjoyable, and one of which that, as I say, is perfect for fans of the era, and especially that unusual tie between Time War and 60s Doctor Who, because it's something that many years ago you couldn't really imagine happening. However, Big Finish are now able to expand on that and deliver a rather emotional and fun story. The Uncertain Shore by Simon Gurrier is the second episode of this box set and continues the slightly different taste of the Time War compared to what we've got within the 8th Doctor Time War series and of course the Gallifrey Time War series. This time round we see Susan and Veclin go to a planet that is about to be savaged by the Time War essentially. However, they need to figure out who is the Dalek spy within this microcosm society, and it is once again a rather direct character piece, and you really get used to the people throughout this story and have a much more personal experience to the Time War and how it affects rather vulnerable planets that in reality don't really have much impact within the Time War itself, and they are simply being destroyed just because the Daleks have got a little bit bored and want to conquer everything. In this episode we get the continuation of the relationship between Susan and Veclin, which I didn't mention within the previous story because because I think Ian kind of took that role as opposed to Veclin. Veclin is of course portrayed by Beth Chalmers, and she has appeared for a various amount of Time War stories in the past. She did of course debut within the War Doctor Time War series, and I do believe she's appeared on a few occasions throughout the 8th Doctor Time War series as well. And it's nice to have a few ties to some of the other Time Lords throughout Gallifrey society. Of course we have Gallifrey doing that as well within their own mini-series of having Narvin and Romana and Leela. This time around you have an expansion of the more core part of Gallifrey, almost the War Council. And I think that Veclin is a character that you either like her or hate her in a way. She's one of those people that I certainly got more respect for within this box set. I think that we got to see a much more relaxed side to her character, her going on a mission with Susan, and a relationship blossoming between them. It was of course very evident that both of them cared for each other, although Veclin was just there to make sure that Susan did her job. I think that over time that almost form of custody between them created a bond. I really loved the way that Susan and Veclin needed to take up painting throughout this story in order to blend in with the society. I just realised that was a paint pun, well done, bonus points for me. But to blend in with this society and to kind of figure out who the spy is, get to know people, and did to almost pursue this fake identity within this episode in order to get to know everybody within this village and figure out the darker truth that is lurking underneath, who is working for the Daleks and how can they stop that person. This episode did in fact remind me of a plotline that was used within the 8th Doctor Time War series, Series 1, where we had a rather personal telling of the Time War involving a husband and wife. This box set kind of takes a similar approach to that. I love the way that throughout the early half of this story we had Susan going off, meeting different people, getting to know what their lifestyle was like, and a lovely little twist was that there was this documentary maker, almost a Louis Theroux from another planet, however interviewing these people, these day-to-day people within this village, talking about their lives, what they do, in order for him to then send off this footage to another world or just out into the universe, so that when their time comes and their planet is wiped from history, people will still be able to remember them because this message has been sent out into the universe for other planets to watch. I really love that part of the story, and it's something of which that I've not really seen involved within other Time War box sets. It's certainly a unique way to tell the Time War, and a great way to show how different people are responding to almost this imminent danger. A brilliant thing that has been happening across the board with the Big Finish Time War series is that we have these constant references to the Daleks. However, you don't really know when they're going to crop up. This episode is a good example of that because we have an episode entirely focused around finding this Dalek spy. However, the Daleks aren't really involved. They're off doing their own thing somewhere else in the universe, probably killing people. However, their impact is still felt. I think that, accompanied of course with Nicholas Briggs's voice modulator, I think that creates a great threat when it comes to the Daleks within the Time War, and as the Time War content keeps on going on, we are starting to see this much more threatening side to the Daleks, and the type of Dalek that I imagine will be present within the Time War, ruthless, deadly, and an actual threat, which is something that has been starting to dwindle in other Dalek stories, simply because we do see them that much, and kind of the fear factor does sometimes start to decrease a little bit. This story does also feature the Orgorons, not any type of Orgoron however, Robo-Orgorons, of course a great reference to the Dalek invasion of Earth and another tie to that of 1960s Doctor Who, and I would have loved to see more of them. They were involved within the later half of this story, literally the final act, and once again I would have loved to see them being brought in a little bit earlier, just to make the story ever so slightly more exciting, to create more, essentially more combat and more stuff that I expect to see within the Time War, but I'm aware that this story tries to do something different, and perhaps bringing in the Orgorons a little bit earlier would have made this story feel a bit more like an 8th Doctor Time War adventure. However, I like their involvement nevertheless. I think the story within the 8th Doctor Time War series, Dr. Orgoron, that has certainly upped my appreciation of the Orgorons over the past few years. It's nice to see them return in this story and see the Daleks utilising another race, essentially in their escapades in order to defeat the Time Lords and everybody else in the universe when it comes to their Time War battles. The third story is Assets of War, as written by Lou Morgan. Now, I really sunk my teeth into this story. It was a thoroughly enjoyable adventure, and I love the way that this episode managed to incorporate in the corruption of Time Lords and Gallifrey, because I love the way that Big Finish managed to depict the Time Lords as being sometimes and more than often just as bad as the Daleks, because both of the sides have very evident flaws, both of them go back in time and cause havoc, and let's face it, without the Time Lords, the Time War wouldn't be a thing, because they've contributed to it just as much as the Daleks have. And this story, we get to see that being a little bit more of a direct impact, not only with Gallifrey itself against the Daleks, but also Gallifrey and society against the Time Lords, because of course something that is often forgotten is that Time Lord is a rank within Gallifrey. It's kind of a equivalent of a degree or a PhD. You need to graduate in order to become a Time Lord, and the usual people on Gallifrey are just Gallifreyans. They live in the dry lands, and they have a little bit of a stigma attached to the Time Lords, very much like how the Time Lords have a stigma attached to the people who live in the dry lands. And we get to see the divide between them start to simmer throughout this story, as we have Lord Vivax creating a weapon that he believes could help very much within the Time War and the war efforts, and it is of course Rasmus, Veclin and Susan's job to go to this laboratory and basically see a presentation of this weapon and to decide if the usage of such weapon is viable within the Time War. And I'm getting the impression that at this stage we are still in the very early parts of the Time War, and we've not fully seen the destruction of the Time War as of yet. It is definitely not anywhere near the devastation that we get to see within the War Doctor era. This is a little bit more of a relaxed, simmering version of the Time War, and we get to see Susan basically apply her knowledge that she has gained on Earth, of course a future version of Earth, as was her other adventures, and basically her all-good nature coming out. Of course she has a lot of differences between the Doctor. She decides to intervene when she believes it is right, but also at the same time she has the good nature that the Doctor has, believing that every race should be allowed to kind of do what it wants. This story sees Lord Vivax basically imprison a creature from the vortex and use them as a weapon, because they feed off time distortions and time-related stuff that of course Time Lords are absolutely full of, and naturally of course that sounds like an absolutely ridiculous idea, and something of which the Time Lords should definitely not be utilising as a weapon. However, Lord Vivax decides to do that, and it is a little bit questionable to start with, and you understand where both characters are coming from. And what I love with this story is that it kind of gets nowhere. Susan has gone to this planet in order to make a conclusion. She makes said conclusion having experienced certain things throughout this story, which I'm not going to go into. However, Rasmus and the other Time Lords have another conclusion, and their conclusion kind of overrides Susan when Susan's back is turned. So in a way, in a very political way, this episode achieves absolutely nothing, because they went to this planet knowing full well what they were going to do with this weapon, and they decide to do it anyway. So Susan's involvement is kind of a little bit of a one to make their conscience feel better, as opposed to an actual way of moving Gallifrey forward and deciding if the weapon is good enough to use in the Time War or not. The Orovics were also a worthy threat. I actually felt like the Time Lords in this story that are working within this laboratory were at threat due to the Orovics being let out rather conveniently and managing to track down a number of different Time Lords and kill them. Throughout the majority of this episode, I don't know if it was just because of the sound design, but it did remind me very much of the Demogorgon from Stranger Things and the way that they were unleashed from Hawkins' lab. Apologies if you've not watched Stranger Things, but the way that they came out of the weird upside down crack thing and then sort of went into the lab and started to kill everybody in their path. This story very much gave me the impression of that, and I think that the Orovics were good for one singular story. I think that shows a very good sign of a strong script, because normally you have Doctor Who stories that have your usual villain of the week and they make very little impact. However, this story generated impact. It generated fear, and I really like that. I appreciated it, and it made for a rather refreshing listen. And of course, as I mentioned at the very start, there is also references to Gallifrey society and corruption and people believing different things on a personal level when you start to see somebody talking about their family and what the Time Lords have done to them. And as I say, I'm not going to go into that because that is a spoilery part of the story which you should figure out for yourselves. However, it is a really brilliant part of the episode and one of which that I thoroughly enjoyed listening to. And I think that Lou Morgan did a very good job with this episode. I would love to see more from her in the future. Susan's War concludes with the Shoreditch Intervention, as written by Alan Barnes, which does of course feature the return of Paul McGann as the 8th Doctor, and no doubt is one of the main draws for this box set for a number of different people. And I think that this episode does a very good job of catering to both audiences. As I have previously mentioned throughout this review, I've not listened to those 8th Doctor stories involving Susan. However, I didn't really feel like I was missing out on key details, because this story and the rest of the box set reminds you of those key details. It almost drip feeds you all the information that you need to know throughout this story and the previous episodes in order for you to go into this episode having the knowledge that is required to appreciate this story. And equally for those people that have listened to those previous adventures, this episode caters for a good reminder of what happened, and more importantly, has the relationship between the Doctor and Susan changed since that previous adventure? How has it impacted their relationship? Is there a little bit of tension there? Is it warmer than how it used to be? Can they kind of sympathise over what happened within the previous episode, and does it bring them closer together? And I think that this episode answers a few of those questions, and in a rather unusual way caters as a rather convenient 50th anniversary special. It feels like an event. We see Susan go back in time to the very familiar time of 1963 London. We get to see her going on a little bit of a quest to figure out what the Doctor buried on Earth after they did of course arrive, the first Doctor and Susan, right at the very beginning within Doctor Who's history. And it is one of those stories that, as I say, it is very fan service, because we get to see the return to Totter's Lane very, very briefly. Susan trying to figure out more about her past. This episode also acts as a very good commentary for a social perspective of 1963 London, seeing the youths playing about on the streets and having motorbikes going all over and blaring music. It did very much feel like you were within the time period, and it was a good take on the 1960s, especially given the context of the much colder episode of An Unearthly Child, of course taking place a few months later in the winter months as opposed to in the summer of 1963, because of course Susan has arrived a little bit earlier. The time ring that she was using in fact sent her back a few months early, meaning that she is in London just before the Great Train Robbery. Paul McGann is brilliant throughout this story. I thoroughly enjoyed him, and he is a Doctor that I'm growing in appreciation for with each individual release. I think that the Time War version of the 8th Doctor has been on a few rocky bits of ground throughout the previous 8th Doctor releases, simply because I've wanted to see his Doctor being pushed, and I imagine that that is going to be something that we will see a lot more of throughout the later events within the Time War. I suppose the 8th Doctor Time War series kind of started off with this earlier version of the 8th Doctor, and as we edge closer to the Time War, he's getting a little bit more serious and a little bit more darker in his portrayal. I think that sometimes he can be a little bit snappy, which is something of which that is a complete polar opposite to, say, the Lucy Miller variation of the 8th Doctor, or even the 8th Doctor that we've seen throughout the movie. Big Finish have managed to really pad out this incarnation and arguably give him in fact one of the biggest eras and biggest character changes than any other Doctor within classic series Doctor Who. I think he comes very close to the likes of Sir Sylvester McCoy or even the 6th Doctor, and the journey that he has also had due to the Big Finish audio drama adventures. I think that this story, I think Paul McGann does it very well. We have that emotional side, him connecting with Susan, and I think that both him and Carol Ann Ford bounce off each other very well. It is very evident that they have a close relationship, which is odd because I couldn't imagine Susan working with any other Doctor other than William Hartnell. However, I think that this incarnation and companion duo pull it off incredibly well. We have a few snappy references to the more grandfatherly side of the first Doctor, but also at the same time glimmers of that more happy and romantic side of the 8th Doctor kind of seeping in throughout brief scenes. Of course, when they get a little bit distracted and things seem a bit more relaxed, they reminisce about Ian and Barbara and those early early adventures and how much has changed, not just for Susan but also the Doctor as well, going through several different incarnations. And even that concept of having Susan within the 8th Doctor's TARDIS is something that only Big Finish could do. So if you're a fan of both the 8th Doctor and 1960s Doctor Who, then very much this story is something that I imagine that you will enjoy. The Daleks do also come within the later half of this story, which I must admit I was expecting a little bit more of them, but I came out of the episode actually glad that we didn't see much of them. They come within the later half, and we get to see the Doctor almost sacrificing himself in a rather dramatic scene with some great polar opposites to the Dalek invasion of Earth, and it would have in fact made for a very emotional departure for the 8th Doctor, so I thought that that was very well handled and well written by Alan Barnes, and I liked the fact that this box set, although set in the Time War, has only had brief scenes with the Daleks. It has gone and done different things, and I think that is the key thing to take from not only this episode, but the entirety of this box set, and it also applies to some of the other Time War series that Big Finish do. Each individual series does something different, it has another aim, and not every aim will be for every single listener, and I think that the perfect thing with box sets such as Susan's War, yes, admittedly, this is not an essential purchase, it's not a box set that you have to listen to in order to get full understanding of the other Time War series that Big Finish release, meaning that if you are a fan of Susan or want to know more about Susan within the Time War, then by all means go and purchase this box set. However, for those of you that are not particularly a fan of the era, not particularly a fan of the character perhaps, don't need to listen to this box set. It's not one of those things where you physically have to buy it in order to experience the Time War series as a whole, as that is the beauty of the Time War. Lots of things are going on at the same time. You have the War Master going off and causing havoc, you have Susan trying to help out, you have the Doctor trying to defeat the Daleks from not going to the front line, then you have the more political aspect within Gallifrey Time War. All the different series tackle different areas of Gallifrey society, but also the effects of the Time War on the broader universe as a whole. So as I say, if this episode and this box set is a box set that you think you will enjoy, by all means go out and buy this release. However, if you are a little bit sceptical, very much like how I was to start with, then maybe go listen or watch a few more reviews in order to decide if this release is in fact for you. So thank you very much for watching this review, I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have any questions about Susan's War, please do feel free to leave them in the comment section below, and I will of course try my best to answer them at some point in the near future. And due to the fact that we are currently in lockdown, if you are interested by Doctor Who and the adventures of the Time War, then I definitely recommend checking out some of my other Time War related reviews, including the adventures of the 8th Doctor, and more importantly the adventures of the War Master as well. Currently there is 4 box sets out starring Derek Jacobi, and I highly recommend you checking out all 4 of those releases, because all of them are absolutely brilliant in their own way, and it is one of the series that is probably some of the best content that Big Finish have produced over the past few years. So if you are to listen to any box sets during lockdown, the War Master should definitely be one that you add to your list. So thank you very much for watching this review, and I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.